Yeah, how do you go about distinguishing between a false flag and what I might call a real or an organic event?
Um, well, I would say that it probably depends on the event you're talking about. You know, in the case of January 6th, there were real people there for a rally, and there were various actors that were trying to make people think it was acceptable and legal for them to enter the Capitol grounds at that point. So, you know, that was obviously orchestrated, not on the sense of the people, the Trump supporters that were, you know, let into the Capitol, but on the part of those that did the letting in, and you know, on the part of either Capitol Police or other figures, informants, what have you, that were like in the crowd posing to be Trump supporters and whatnot. That obviously suggests that there was some intentionality for things to develop that particular way for a particular purpose, being the dissemination of this narrative about Trump supporters and domestic terrorism, which was foreshadowed essentially a year before, where a top figure at DHS said that Trump supporters would do exactly that. In front of Congress, and saying that DHS could see it building and couldn't quite stop it, which, if you're as cynical as me, essentially amounts to them saying that we're going to create the conditions for this exact thing to happen.
Yeah, my one of my rule sets is if within 24 hours of the event there is lockstep talking points that went through some sort of obvious focus grouping, you know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Insurrection, insurrection, insurrection. It was an insurrection right away, and that was
Hmm.
just blanketed because that's one of the things they do. They do that blanket coverage, which just sort of
Hmm.
creates that narrative framework right away. Whereas, remember, I don't know if you remember, but I remember the DC snipers, Malvo and this other guy, right? Nobody knew what was happening. It was confusing. There were many narratives. They had wrong pictures of cars. Like it was all confusing. But when you get that crisp narrative right away,
Yeah.
sometimes even before the event, oh, building 7 fell down, like before it did, right? It's like
Hmm.
one of those moments makes me just go, might not be entirely organic.
Yeah. And then the other factor here in terms of the AI era in which we are stepping into is the potential for AI generated people to say things they didn't actually say, or for events, you know, through this whole deep fake thing, to suggest that, you know, certain realities exist when in fact they do not, which is, you know, a whole different layer to all of this, for sure. And
Yeah.
I'm sure is going to be very heavily weaponized, which is again why I think it's important for people to engage just as much in offline discourse as online discourse, just because if you are purely online and they are taking increased control of the virtual world, you're going to increasingly receive data and information that they are manipulating for their purposes. And I think right now we're seeing more of that than we truly ever have. So,
Yeah.
you know, being offline and engaging with people and seeing how things really are outside of the online world, I think is more important than it's ever been.
Yeah. I unfortunately consume a lot online because it's the nature of my job. And I find I have to
Likewise.
get out hazard, occupational hazard. And I'm worried that I'm being controlled. I'm worried that as sophisticated as I am, like I know that Twitter is shot through with bots and they've gotten increasingly sophisticated. They look and
Hmm.
sound like real people,
Hmm.
right? And just watching how they shape, they don't always just come out and go, Chris, you ignorant human, right? They're very subtle. And it's not, I think that it's sophisticated enough that I am personally targeted. And I think everybody is to some extent because there's
Absolutely.
a, there's a file. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah. I definitely think that is what's happening. I think they have very individualized profiles on people that in part have been produced by AI and some of these big data mining firms that work for intelligence agencies like Palantir. And the goal of that is to basically, you know, the military and all of these groups, knowing that we know that they've invested millions of dollars in building essentially bot armies that are used to conduct influence operations. And we know they also do that against the domestic populace. And that, you know, this was legalized under the Obama era. They lifted the domestic propaganda ban and all of these other things with the NDAA, or one of the NDAAs in the Obama era. And all of that can be pointed at the US populace domestically, for the purpose of advancing, you know, what these guys say is in the US's national interest, but increasingly it's in, you know, either the deep state or the power elite's best interest, which tends to be from preventing any sort of real change from happening that would lessen their power or prevent us from, you know, going even further down this this path that we are on. So, I definitely think it's, you know, open season for psyops in a way it never has been. And what I worry too, in this particular sphere, is that there's an increased effort because of their efforts to regain trust. What they're seeking to do is sort of to co-opt or use or lend people that don't deserve it anti-establishment clout, so that they can essentially act like they're going to deliver the change that people want. But they'll be delivering the same policies that their bases, their political bases, are against, whether that's digital ID or programmable surveillable money, or things of that nature, while claiming that they're against those things. As an example, with like central bank digital currencies, there's
Hmm.
also a dual effort by commercial banks to issue commercial bank digital currencies, which are also CBDCs under the names of deposit tokens or bank issued stable coins. And so, maybe figures like Trump and Ron DeSantis and some of these other figures have, said, oh, if we're elected or in power, there will be no central bank digital currency. But are they against, JP Morgan issuing, deposit tokens or stable coins that are just as programmable and surveillable as what, the central bank could issue? And is that really any better for prosperity and liberty of Americans? Is it better to be surveilled by Wall Street and have them program your money than it is to have the Fed? Quite frankly, not, especially when you consider that people like Jamie Dimon, for example, have come out on record saying they think private property should be seized in order to meet, UN climate goals and things of that nature. It's really ultimately the same thing at the end of the day. And so I think we're going to see, various efforts to try and herd people into the same system. But in order to have that happen, they have to convince people that the initiatives they're supporting are actually against this control grid to an extent, by
So
giving it different names and different appearances. But ultimately, it's fundamentally the same.